The Lost Jotunn, World of Aaru series by Temperance Quill. Serine. A caravan made up of around 20 trahas, hut-like structures built on skis, meandered through a pass in the Glacies Mons of Aaru, aiming to get to the inn by nightfall or else risk staying between its precarious walls for the night. One of the footmen found himself falling to the ground after tripping over something. Assuming it was a rock or similar buried beneath the snow, once up he kicked the offending object. He was about to turn and continue on when he heard a moan. Dropping to the ground again, he started digging. Pushing the snow away, he uncovered a half-dressed boy. Pressing his hand against the boy's chest, he was surprised to find him still breathing. "I found someone here," he called. One of the trahas stopped, and a girl ran over, carrying a thick woolen blanket. She wrapped it around the boy as the footman lifted him off the ground. Serine was the caravan's resident healer, and as such, the boy was now her responsibility. "Let's get him inside and warmed up. He's blue with cold," she said as she noticed his coloring. Once he was settled in her bed, she sent the footman to take control of her oxen and get them moving while she wrapped him up in even more blankets and added fuel to the warming stones. But his color didn't change even as he started to feel hot to the touch. Unwrapping him from the blanket, she examined him thoroughly. He looked roughly 14 to 16 years of age, so that meant little in Aaru, or one could look however old they wished or felt at that particular moment. What she had first taken as blonde hair was pure white, and when she lifted his lids to check his eyes, they were the pale gray of an overcast sky. Finding a sizable lump on the back of his head and bruises all over his body, she thought he probably had a broken rib or two as well. She assumed he must have been in some kind of accident. Casting what healing spells she could, they should have repaired any internal injuries, but his skin remained discolored. Before long, he started to thrash in his sleep, and his body was coated in sweat. Fearing that he'd caught a fever and would become delirious, she restrained him to the bed to keep him from hurting himself and placed ice packs to keep him from overheating. All the while, his skin tone never changed. Could he be one of them? Hoping she was wrong, she cooled the heat stones and parted the drapes until the temperature in the room was barely tolerable. Almost instantly his thrashing stopped and his body lost its sheen of sweat. Oh no, Kokarte will not like this at all. Best not to tell him, she thought to herself. Edna Kokarte had proven to be extremely intolerant of non-humans, something so rare she hadn't thought to question it when she signed on. So with at least 10 more days before they reached the nearest settlement and all signs indicating that he would live, it would be her responsibility to see to this boy's health and safety until they got there. A few days later, Serine was putting a cold cloth on his forehead. His eyes snapped open. Before she could say anything, her wrist was clenched in a strong grip. "Where am I? How did I get here?" His striking gaze flashing around the room. "Calm down, you're all right," she said soothingly. "We found you in the snow, battered and unconscious. You've been with us for a few days now. I'm Serine. I've been taking care of you." She forced him to let go of her wrist, though she did keep hold of his hand. "What?" He tried to get up, only to fall back down with a winch. "Careful, you have a few broken ribs. I've healed them mostly, but they're fragile. Your insides took a beating, too. Much longer, and something might have ruptured," she informed him, hoping that some of what she said got through. The boy's fear pulled at her heartstrings. "Ow!" he wondered aloud, looking lost. "We don't know. You were found on the trail, half naked and alone. What do you remember?" He started to say before he clammed up, his eyes swirling with pain and confusion. "Let's start with something simple. What's your name?" His eyes still skittering around, he answered, "Blitz." "Good. What do you remember, Blitz?" I don't know." The lie was so obvious she wanted to call him out on it, but he was hurt and scared, so she would cut him some slack. "Why is it so hot in here?" he groused, trying to change the subject. "Because not all of us are Jotunn who can walk around in freezing temperatures like it's a sunny day. You may be hot, but I'm barely avoiding frostbite." It took him a moment to realize what she'd said, but once he did, he tried to jump out of bed again, but the restraints held. "Calm down, you're fine," she tried to reassure him again. "Then what are these?" he demanded, waving his restrained hand. "Those were to keep you from thrashing around. You've been delirious on and off. Those have been some fun times." "And now?" the question accusatory. "And now they're to keep you from doing anything stupid until I can assess your condition." Slapping her hand against his forehead, most of her sympathy washed away, she sent her magic into him, as little as it was. Even though she'd been hired on as a healer, it wasn't her strongest magic. But as near as she could tell, there was some bruising where he'd been clocked on the head, but no permanent damage. "Why are you helping me?" He eyed her suspiciously. "Because you were alone, injured, and couldn't annoy me by talking," she muttered. "Well, I'm awake now. Just let me go and I'll find my own way." With no idea where you are, injured and no provisions? I don't care if the cold doesn't bother you, you wouldn't last more than a few days at best. What do you plan to do with me then? We'll be reaching Iseta in a few days. Provided I can keep you hidden until then, once there I'll cancel my contract and help you get home. Provided you know where that is. She raised a brow at him. No one else knows I'm here? He sounded both incredulous and terrified at the same time. They know I took in a boy found in the snow, but they don't know what you are, and hopefully we can keep it that way. She dreaded the idea of word getting out. Why can't they know? Because the headman of this caravan is a bastard. Either way, you need to rest and heal, and I need to make us some dinner. Can I trust you to keep quiet? For now. Trusting that his injuries and the restraints would keep him in place. Even if he didn't want to, she went to prepare a meal for them both. One advantage to living in the Glacies Mons was they never had to worry about food going bad. Just hang it outside and it would be frozen solid within an hour. Tonight was fish. The smell soon filled the traha as it cooked on the hot plate. Hey, what are you doing? Trying to boil me alive? Cursing under her breath, she returned to his bedside and cracked the drapes around him to allow in the cold air from outside. Now be quiet or someone will hear you. She sealed the partition tighter as she left to keep the warmth from the kitchen out of the bedroom. Returning to her small kitchen, she prepared them both a platter and brought it to him. She helped him sit up and handed him the plate. He gave the contents a sniff and must have been satisfied because he dug in. Do you know why you were out here alone? She prodded, hoping to get some answers while he was distracted. Wasn't alone. We were traveling. He took a bite. We were attacked. I fell. Another bite. I don't remember anything after that. They continued to eat in silence. He still had a few bites left when she saw him start to nod off. Back to bed, I think. She took the plate from him and helped him lie back. What did you put in the food? He slurred. Nothing. You're just tired and need rest, she said more impatiently than she intended, but he was already out for the count. Huffing a breath, she went to clean up and took herself to bed. The headman had been in a hurry of late and would be up at the crack of dawn. Blitz. After waking up in an unfamiliar place with a girl who called herself Serine, the next few days were a blurry stream of sleep and bouts of consciousness. He would always wake just long enough to eat, then he would doze off again. He suspected she was putting something in the food. She kept saying she was trying to help him, but he didn't know her, and no one helped anyone for free. And he wasn't familiar enough with this side of the border to know if going to Iseta was a good thing or a bad thing. He needed to find a way to escape and get back to his family. Whatever happened to separate them was still a blur in his mind, but he knew he had to get back to them. And he was positive that if Serine knew where he came from, she would do something horrible. He didn't know what, but it would be bad. So during his short periods of wakefulness, he began to work at the bindings she kept on his wrists. If he could fray the rope just enough, he could snap his bindings and escape. Until then, he would be quiet and try not to draw attention to himself. Serene. The plan was to keep Blitz a secret, but like most plans, it didn't take much for it to go up in smoke. They were another 3 days from Iseta, and Blitz had spent most of his time sleeping. He had been cooperative enough that Serene had grown complacent. She was sitting on the box of her traha when she heard a shout come from just behind her. Grabbing the rein, she brought the oxen to a halt and peered around the back, cursing when she saw Blitz trying to run away and one of the footmen chasing after him. Jumping from the box, she raced after them. As she suspected, Blitz didn't make it far before he collapsed, his arms gripping his torso. The footman got to him first. She saw him reach down and then recoil as if he'd been burned. Pushing him aside, she crouched down and used her magic to see what damage Blitz had done to himself. Thankfully, it seemed he'd only strained muscles that hadn't been ready for such a mad dash. Help me get him inside. As she tried to lift Blitz from the snow, Gordon didn't move. She looked up at him. Help me, she repeated, putting as much command into her voice as she could. Leave him. I'm not touching that thing, Gordon insisted, crossing his arms over his chest. Fine, then. Getting him off the ground herself, she gave Gordon a well-deserved glower as she passed him. Half dragging Blitz back inside, she laid him on the bed, not caring when he groaned with the movement. What were you thinking? She scolded while stripping him of his wet clothes and using a cloth to dry him. I thought I could get away. I'm not safe here. You keep drugging the food. I do not. She was truly ready to throttle him. Then why am I always so sleepy? He complained, throwing his arm over his eyes. You're sleepy because you're hurt, as this little episode I hope demonstrated. Then why did you keep me tied up? He lifted one of his hands that had a cuff on it, the frayed rope still attached. To hopefully keep you from doing something like this. She gritted her teeth to keep from screaming. Taking a deep breath to calm herself, she continued. Now the headman will know you're here before the day is over. What will he do? He asked, gulping. Maybe you should have thought of that before taking a mad dash out the door and revealing yourself to the whole caravan, she couldn't help but scold. She took a breath and rubbed her forehead with her fingers. There's nothing he can do. Even if the code wasn't clear on the requirement to render aid to the lost, this is my home and I can let anyone I wish live in it. That won't keep him from being an arrogant blowhard, though. He hates anyone non-human. And you don't? The question was so laced with disbelief that he was pretty much calling her a liar, which seemed quite odd. No, I don't. My father's Jotunn. Figuring the revelation might go some way in getting Blitz to trust her. You're a half-breed? He asked incredulously. Don't sound so skeptical, she chided, flicking him in the forehead. She knew she didn't look like her father, or most Jotunn for that matter. Her near-white skin tone and black hair were nothing like the usually blue-skinned and white-haired ice elements, and there was a good reason for that. But that's not important at the moment. I need to get back and make sure they haven't left us, so for the love of fate, please stay here and keep quiet. Rising to rush back to the box, she picked up the reins and got her oxen moving. Though they were now at the end of the line, thankfully they hadn't been left behind. Blitz. Serine was Jotunn? Why hadn't she said something earlier? What clan was she with? The revelation only made Blitz feel a touch easier. He still didn't know why she was helping him or what she would want in return. Removing the useless cuffs from his wrists, he slowly made his way to the front of the traha. Pushing the drape aside that would give him access to the box, he tried to climb out onto the seat. What do you think you're doing? Serine hissed, pushing on his head to get him back inside. It's hot in here, he complained, slapping her hand away. At least put a cloak on. We don't need to advertise that you're here, she pointed at a rack. Grabbing a cloak, he put it on, then tried to climb out onto the box. But he only made it halfway before his torso protested, so he decided to sit below the exit instead, taking a minute to get his breath back. What clan are you? No Ossifor, she answered absently. He wasn't familiar with the name. Must be a Centrum clan. What's yours? We're clanless. That answer was safer than the alternative, and not technically a lie. That explains why you're not marked. He jerked. How do you... I had to examine you when we found you to check for injuries. I only did what was necessary. He could tell she was trying to be reassuring, but he still felt awkward. The idea of being vulnerable and helpless hit him in a place he didn't want to explore. Why are you helping me? Don't you know the rules? What rules? Never shout when in a pass, never step on ice without testing it first, and no one gets left behind. If someone comes across anyone in distress, they're required to offer sanctuary and get them to safety. She might as well have been speaking an alien language. No one helped anyone unless they got something out of it, at least on his side of the mountains. Was this a Centrum thing? Deciding to stay silent for now was the better move, he felt quiet. Serene. Blitz was turning out to be a mystery. The fact that he didn't know the law of sanctuary, something all who lived in Glacies Mons knew from childhood, that he kept checking his food for drugs and poison, and that he wouldn't tell her where it came from or where he was going, all said something about it, and none of it was good. It said that he came from somewhere dangerous, somewhere the law of sanctuary didn't exist, and there was only one place that fit that criteria, Tenebris, the land to the west of the mountains. It was a land of monsters and dark magic, and she could understand why someone would want to leave. She could also understand why someone wouldn't admit to being from there. They would be instantly met with suspicion on this side of the border. That Blitz kept asking what she wanted from him spoke of a long list of disappointments, and she would be damned if she would add herself to his list. She would protect him, and if he wanted to find his family, she would help him. And if they proved dangerous to him, well, she would make sure he knew he had other options. When the caravan stopped early that evening, Serene had a sneaking suspicion she knew why. Later, she was mending some tack while waiting for their evening meal to cook. She heard the headman call from outside. Gesturing to Blitz to keep quiet, she opened the drapes to step out. What can I do for you, Gacarde? She always called him by his given name, mostly because she knew it annoyed him. It's been brought to my attention that you took in a stranger that was found on the road. It's what the code demanded. Any traveler lost is to be given sanctuary, are they not? She challenged, daring him to disagree. That's true, but I trust there's a good reason why you didn't see fit to inform me. He was injured and unconscious. I wasn't even sure he would live. It didn't seem important until he woke and could give me some answers as far as who he was and where he came from, not to mention the stink he would have raised. You should have told me. What if he turned out to be dangerous? He scolded. Given his injuries, even if he wasn't going to be causing any trouble until we got to Iseta. She crossed her arms over her chest. Those creatures are only harmless if they're dead. You should have informed us once you knew what it was so we could deal with it appropriately. She had no delusions about what he considered appropriate. He would have thrown Blitz back into the cold and left him to die, code or no code. I didn't know taking someone into my home was an issue for public dispute. I won't have that creature in my caravan. There was a moment's pause as she got ready to face off with him when— Fine then, I won't be. They both jumped at the sound of Blitz's voice. Turning, she found him stepping up behind her, and she instantly wanted to throttle him. Cacardi gazed at him in terror, and as he strode forward, the man looked ready to run. We're not going anywhere, she told him, ready to force the point. But I think it's time for you to go. She turned and shooed Cacardi. This isn't over yet, he promised before stalking off. Turning back to Blitz, you, back in bed. Hoping to get him back inside, he gave little resistance as he slowly settled back onto the bed. I don't see how you thought you were actually going somewhere, she shot as she went back to preparing their evening meal. What do you want? What do you mean? She asked, distracted by her task. I have nothing of value, and neither does my clan, if that's what you're hoping for. I already told you why I'm helping you. Because of some code? Yes, because of some code. She reached around and picked up a bowl to ladle out a portion for him. So you're doing all this out of the goodness of your heart. The sarcasm dripped from his tongue. No, She paused, taking a breath to center herself and come up with a cogent explanation. I work as a healer. That's how I make a living. People have to trust that no matter what, I'll do what I can to keep them alive. If anyone found out that I'd left someone to die, no matter the circumstances, they would never trust me again. I could lose everything. And stop worrying about the food. I'll not waste all this time trying to keep you alive just to poison you, she scolded when she saw him examining it. Giving her a strange look, he started taking small sips. Soon it was gone. Satisfied? When he didn't reply, she turned her back on him and continued with her work. You're not leaving me to die. I'm trying to leave. You're someone who's hurt. A stubborn someone for certain, but a hurt one nonetheless. You may think you can survive out there alone, but I know different, and I'd not let anyone go off on their own in your condition. I'd be fine, he insisted, not for the first time. Reaching forward, she poked him in the torso where his ribs were cracked. He fell backward on the bed, acting as if he'd been sucker-punched. You could barely take a poke. How long do you think you'll last out in the mountains alone? She argued for what felt like the 100th time. All he could do was give her an angry glare as he held his torso, trying to get his breath back. Now stop being so high on yourself and just accept the fact that for some reason a person is helping you, all the while expecting nothing in return. She turned away and nothing more was said as he quickly fell asleep again. She knew what was coming when they stopped early again the next night. She heard the crunching of snow and saw shadows form around her doorway. When the drapes opened and Cacardi walked in with 2 large men at his flank, she remained sitting, rubbing oil into the rough patches of some of the oxen's tack. You know what we're here for, Serine, he said to her. Yep, and they weren't getting it. Where is he? In the back, sleeping like he should be, she indicated, continuing her task as if unconcerned. Fine, bring him out. Was he serious? No. What? No. He's in my home and here he stays. Now leave. Cacardi bristled at her attempt to order him. Get out of our way, girl. He reached down and grabbed her arm, giving her a little shake. Those things destroy everything that comes across their path. As soon as he's healthy, he'll turn on us, and I, for one, have no intention of being frozen to death. He won't survive out there alone. Now get out, she demanded again, wrenching her arm out of his grasp and taking a step back. We're not leaving without it, Cacardi declared, motioning for one of the men to do who knew what. Who fixed your broken arm, Gordon? She reminded the snitch. It made him pause. And who fixed your broken nose when Triscat punched you? She reminded Jacket when Cacardi gestured for him to take over. He paused as well. None of this matters. It has to go, Cacardi shouted, pushing at the shoulders of both men. This was looking bad, for them. See, the thing was, Serine hadn't been entirely honest about her skill set when she signed on. Oh, she was a healer, which is what the notice had been asking for, but it wasn't her strongest magic by half. Something this blowhard hadn't thought to check when he hired her on. Last chance, boys, she offered. Neither took her up on it. Clenching her hands, the men found themselves reaching for their guts, then falling to their knees as everything they'd eaten that day came up in a chorus of vomit. Now get out, she ordered again. On their hands and knees, they practically fell out of her traha trying to get away from her. Stepping to the edge of the door, she shouted, and stay out, then pulled the drapes shut with a little more drama than was warranted. This is going to cause trouble, she thought before hearing footsteps coming from behind. What did you do to them? any sign of Bliss's usual arrogance gone. Pulled every drop of stomach acid from their bodies. She wrinkled her nose at the mess that had been left on her floor. With a wave of her hand, the water from her wash bucket flowed over and swept the mess outside. "You're a water element?" he stated what she considered to be the obvious. "Yep." "You said your father was a Jotunn." "He is." "Then how—" "My mother's a Nyx." "How did that happen?" "Well, when an ice element and a water element fall in love," she began sarcastically, giving that question the response it deserved. "Ha ha. What do we do now?" he asked, looking at the exit as if expecting the men to come back through it. "You're going back to bed, and I'm going to finish cleaning this tack." She sat down to continue what she'd been doing before she'd been so rudely interrupted. "I'm not feeling tired for once. What can I do?" he asked, stubbornly sitting next to her. Without a word, she handed him a piece of tack and an oilcloth. "So how did a Jotunn end up mated to a Nyx?" he repeated, showing his first real sign of curiosity since he'd awoken. She saw no harm in telling him the story. "My mother and I were migrating along the glacial edge when we found someone floating in the water. My father." "Wait, so you're not Jotunn?" "I never said I was. I said my father was. Pay attention." "So we took hold of him and brought him to shore. He was injured worse than you were. We tried to heal him, but we could only do so much, so we built a stretcher and dragged him to the nearest village we knew of. I was a child, so much of what went on was lost on me, but by the time we got to the healer, my mother and he had fallen in love. And not long after, he became my father." "So how does that work? Water and ice?" "They seem to make it work. Last I saw them, they were living quite happily on the shores of a river near his clan." "They didn't object?" "Why would they?" I don't know." That was a lie, but she let it go. Maybe interbreeding wasn't allowed where he came from. "What was it like for you, growing up among people who weren't your own?" For the next few hours she told him stories of her childhood, of Harit, her father, who would carry her around on his shoulders and loved her as much as any real father could, of gentle Harfon, her grandmother, who taught her about working leather and making furs while telling her the most amazing stories, of Harit, her childhood friend, whom she loved like a sister, and the trouble they got into as children. She talked until he began to nod off where he sat, and she pulled him back into bed. Blitz. That night a blizzard blew through, stopping all activity in the caravan as everyone took shelter. Blitz and Serine were both sleeping when screams from outside woke them both. Making their way outside, they saw others working to free two Trahas buried in snow from a mini avalanche. Standing just behind her, Blitz heard Serine scream. Reaching forward, he turned her with a hand on her shoulder. Meeting her eyes, he knew that look well. She was trapped in some past horror at a time and place where he couldn't follow. From the story she told him earlier, he wouldn't have thought that she had such memories. Certainly not one so strong that they could pull her into her own mind and trap her there. He didn't like it. He began to think of her as something happy and full of light. Whatever horror had her in its grip had no right to her. Looking back, the others were struggling to dig the Trahas out of the snow, which fell almost as fast as they were digging. Striding forward, his hands outstretched, as he waved them from side to side, the snow shifted in waves until the two dwellings weren't covered anymore, and they were able to get the people trapped inside out. Turning around, he looked back at Serine. She was just standing there, looking at him, her mouth hanging open. Then someone could be heard yelling, "It's that creature's fault. It caused this." Turning his head, he saw the headman stomping toward him. "That and that girl," he pointed at Serine. "She placed the whole caravan in danger keeping that thing here." When his words died down, practically everyone was staring at him as though he'd lost his mind. But his words snapped Serine out of her daze. "You pompous bastard!" If not for Blitz, Harif and Kaloga could have died. She pointed at the two individuals who were being carried to her Traha for care. "How do we know it didn't cause this? For what possible purpose?" "I don't know and I don't care. It goes now." "No, he doesn't." Serine's hand clenched in a familiar gesture. The headman fell to his knees, his arms wrapped around his belly, while he heaved the contents of his stomach onto the snow. "Gahar, Tolfa, take this fool home and see to it he stays there while I take care of the injured," she ordered two others. Only staying long enough to make sure they did as she asked, she went to take care of her patients, and Blitz followed. Once inside, she turned into a general, telling people what to do and taking charge of the situation. While she worked to help the two who'd already been brought in, two more arrived. Blitz was driven to help where he could, and he thought he might be starting to understand Serine's desire to help him. It felt alien, but good? But the injured. needed warmth, and he was eventually driven outside to escape the heat. It felt like hours later when Serine joined him. It was a good thing you did. It probably saved their lives. I guess so. You know, you can be cynical and kind of annoying, but I think there's a good heart in there somewhere, she teased, patting him on the chest over the aforementioned organ. What happens now? Now we get to Iseta and then get you home, wherever that is. It took them another day before they saw Iseta in the distance. They kept Kakardi confined to his home and were quick to turn him into the city watch when they arrived. Blitz watched in amazement as he was restrained and led away. I don't understand. I told you it's against the code to leave anyone out there. Did you think I meant it was just bad manners? He'll spend some time in a labor camp, and when he gets out, he'll never run a caravan again. Without a headman, the caravan disbanded, and Serine and Blitz found themselves alone. So where to? She asked him. We were headed for a clan called Halibut, hoping they would take us in. I know it. Should be able to get there in a few days, she assured him and picked up the reins, signaling the oxen to move. Settling on the box next to her, Blitz hoped they would find his family at the end of this journey. Written and narrated by Temperance Quill. Edited by Editing by Elizabeth. If you care to help support this channel, please like and subscribe, and you can sign up for our Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or Venmo at Temperance Quill. Links in the description.